Welcome. Today, well, we're shifting gears a bit. We usually unpack complex topics, research, that sort of thing. But today, our mission is different. We're exploring some raw, frankly, chilling truths from first-hand accounts. These are stories that, well, they defy easy explanation. They pull us into these unsettling moments where fear just manifests, sometimes in places you might expect, like a quiet graveyard, but also in, the ordinary corners of daily life.
Yeah, and these kinds of narratives, they often act as stark reminders, don't they, of how fragile our sense of safety really is and how unpredictable fear can be. It hits on a much more visceral level than just talking about concepts.
Exactly. So let's get into these stories. We're starting, perhaps fittingly, in a place often linked with quiet reflection, but for some, it's become a stage for real terror. The cemetery. Our first story comes from a young man, a gravedigger. He'd recently dropped out of high school, needed work, and, well, he found a job at the local cemetery. He said the work was hard, physically demanding, sure, but usually peaceful, outdoors, unless the weather was bad or, during funerals. Now, this cemetery had a specific layout. There was this private, quite expensive northwest corner, mausoleums, big statues for the wealthier families. It wasn't visited much.
Right, sort of sectioned off.
Precisely. Then one day, his boss calls him, absolutely livid, accusing him of screwing around on those northwest plots because something had been disturbed. And what the boss told him next was genuinely chilling. He said something had tried to dig up a fresh grave there. And he stressed something, not someone. Why? Because the marks weren't from a shovel. They were described as distinct claw marks in the dirt.
Claw marks, not tools.
No. Claw marks. So naturally, this gets treated as an emergency. They decide to put night watchmen on it. And our young gravedigger, he gets, as he put it, voluntold for the first week. The lure was double pay, of course.
Right.
So fast forward to the second to last night of his watch. He's patrolling that northwest plot, the quiet, expensive section, and he sees it. He described it as a flurry of frantic limbs digging at the earth.
Wow.
His first thought, maybe an animal.
Yeah.
He decides to sneak up, use this flashlight technique he knew from hunting. Disorient, whatever it is. But when the beam hit the figure, it wasn't an animal. He said clear as day. It was a human crouched on all fours, digging away at the earth with his or her bare hands.
Bare hands.
Bare hands. He just froze. Totally shocked. Couldn't bring himself to use the rifle he had. He just started shouting, yelling at the person to get away, to leave. And the person did comply. They stood up and started walking away. But the look they gave him, he said it wasn't fear, it was fury, pure anger at being interrupted. He genuinely felt that if I hadn't had that rifle with me, I honestly don't know if I'd be here today. The police came, searched the area, all they found, a few boot footprints leading towards the tree line. The person just vanished, never identified.
What's so disturbing there is that shift, isn't it? From thinking it's maybe an animal to recognizing something human, but acting in such a deeply unnatural, primal way. It really forces you to question what drives someone to do that. What kind of macabre impulse?
Exactly, that primal yet human element.
Yeah.
And speaking of unsettling, sometimes the horror isn't just what you see, but what seems to move on its own. Here's where it gets really interesting. This next story takes us to rural Georgia, a cemetery described as being surrounded by the densest forests. Very isolated.
Okay.
The narrator was just 16, working a summer job, caring for tombstones. Part of his duties involved checking a small mausoleum used by wealthier families, keeping it tidy. So one day he's approaching this mausoleum and he gets that feeling that something is off, that general sense of not being alone.
That prickle on the neck.
Yeah. Then he sees actual candlelight coming from inside the small building. And he hears voices, younger voices, he said, like kids his age, giggling and laughing. But he mentioned it didn't sound particularly wholesome, kind of unnerving laughter.
Okay.
So instead of confronting them himself, maybe thinking it was just kids messing around but feeling uneasy, he calls the security officer on duty. An older guy, retired cop. They go to the mausoleum together. They enter. And it's empty.
Empty, but the voices, the light.
Exactly. Made absolutely no sense, he said. But the candles were there, lit, burning around one specific tomb, and then they saw it. That tomb had been opened, pried open, revealing the remains inside. A child-sized skeleton.
Oh no.
But that wasn't even the most disturbing part. Lying next to the skeleton was, quote, a rattened old child's doll, like the knitted kind. He described it as seriously disturbing to see that old thing smiling away whilst lying hand in hand with an actual kid skeleton.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just staged horror.
Completely.
Yeah.
So they quickly did a sweep of the grounds, looking for whoever did this. But they saw no one. Not a soul. They head back to the mausoleum to secure the tomb, deal with the scene. They step back inside, and the doll, the one that was lying hand in hand with the skeleton.
Yeah.
It was now sitting on the other side of the mausoleum, just sitting there, upright, he said, with that same stitched, uneven smile on its face.
Okay, that's terrifying.
It moved.
It moved. He said he quit the very next day, never went back. Wouldn't blame him.
No.
No.
And connecting that back, it's not just desecration at that point, is it? The repositioning of the doll.
Yeah.
It feels deliberate, like psychological terror. It suggests a presence, something knowing, almost taunting them, actively trying to disturb them on a deeper level. It really amplifies the horror. It absolutely does. It's that impossible detail, the thing that shouldn't happen. So what does this all mean? Well, beyond these creepy encounters, cemeteries can also hold historical secrets that are equally chilling. Our next story comes from Sarah. She was a 20-year-old student in North Carolina on a history trip with her Penn State class, visiting Allied war graves in France. She was initially really excited. They were in this small, quaint town, Sarangenel, at an American cemetery. Over 6,000 fallen soldiers buried there, rows of pristine white crosses. Very moving, usually.
Right, a place of reverence.
But Sarah noticed something odd, an area called Plot E. Just a small, unmarked patch of grass, no obvious graves. And crucially, it wasn't on any official maps or guides she had. Almost
Like it officially didn't exist.
Exactly. As if it didn't exist. She saw a man standing there, in uniform but old, olive drab fatigues, not modern. She walked over. And in this plot, there were markers, but tiny ones. 96 white markers, she said, the size of index cards. Just a small ID number on each. No name, no date, no place of birth, no flags. A complete lack of the reverence seen elsewhere. She asked the man in uniform about it. He explained these were the dishonorable dead. U.S. soldiers who had been dishonorably discharged by the military before being executed.
Executed for what?
For crimes like assault or murder of European civilians during the war.
Yeah.
And they were buried differently too, with their backs facing the other plots, deliberately separated.
Wow. Segregated even in death.
Yeah. And he gave examples. A Georgie Smith murdered an English landowner. A Corporal Clark and Private Guerra who assaulted and killed a 15-year-old girl. Then he mentioned one more name, Louis Till, a black soldier executed for his alleged involvement in the murder of an Italian woman. Sarah recognized the name. It hit her instantly. Louis Till was Emmett Till's father.
Emmett Till, the young boy.
The very same. The one whose mother insisted on an open casket funeral after his brutal murder in Mississippi. This was his father, hanged when Emmett was just 3 years old. Sarah described it as a dark foreshadowing of his own death, just 11 years later. She said, I honestly couldn't believe what I was hearing. This intensely creepy fact, as she called it, it shook her. Made her question everything, wondering if some people, some families are just doomed.
That story is incredibly profound. It shows how history isn't just buried physically, but actively erased, hidden from public view. It forces a confrontation with uncomfortable truths about, honor, justice, prejudice, all hidden within what's supposed to be hallowed ground. The horror there is the reality of our own hidden past.
It really is a powerful reminder of unseen histories. Okay, so let's unpack this next section. Moving from those kinds of historical or possibly supernatural chills, sometimes the most terrifying encounters aren't with ghosts or history, but with the unpredictable darkness in actual people, often in completely everyday settings.
Right. The human element can be the most frightening.
This next story comes from a young woman, 17 at the time. She'd just started working at a local grocery store in the produce department, only 3 weeks in. A girl, around her age maybe, approaches her and asks, "You're new. When did you start?" Seems innocent enough, right?
Standard question.
But this girl just didn't stop talking. She started following the narrator around, even into the employees-only areas, asking for her phone number, suggesting they hang out. It quickly became a daily thing. The girl would come in every single night, buy just one grapefruit, always one grapefruit, pretend to browse, then casually find the narrator. It got so bad the narrator started literally hiding in the hallway to avoid her. She even found out later from the Della manager that this same girl had stalked her and her boyfriend previously.
So there was a pattern already.
A clear pattern. But then it escalates dramatically. The narrator goes to a party at her friend's house. And who shows up? The stalker. Apparently the friend invited her, not knowing the situation. Later, during a sleepover situation at the friend's house, the stalker refuses to sleep on the floor. Insists on sleeping in the bed with the narrator.
Oh, that's incredibly invasive.
Completely. Then, in the bed, the stalker takes off her bra, shirt, and pants and starts trying to kiss and touch the narrator. The narrator is terrified, obviously. She manages to wake up a male friend who is also sleeping over, makes up an excuse about needing to go for a walk just to get away, tricking the stalker into letting her leave the room. Once outside, she and her friend use a race trick, pretend to race, then just bolt in the opposite direction to ditch the stalker. But the girl comes back to the house and just starts banging on the door. For hours.
Yeah.
Like 2 or 3 hours straight. Unbelievably relentless. And it didn't stop there. Later, back at work, the stalker, now wearing a backpack for some reason, intentionally bumps the narrator's cart hard. Then she just starts screaming, throwing all the boxes off the narrator's cart, accusing her of assault, saying she swore at her, making a huge scene.
Wow, public manipulation and aggression.
Yeah. And the manager's reaction was odd. He apparently said to the narrator, "You need to go sleep with her already," which is unsettling, but it also implied he kind of understood what was happening, that the stalker was obsessed. Eventually, the girl just stopped coming to the store. Much later, the narrator saw her on Facebook, married.
What's really disturbing there is that rapid escalation, isn't it? From seemingly awkward social behavior to overt boundary crossing, then predatory actions, and finally public aggression and manipulation. It highlights how someone can systematically test and break down boundaries, and it raises that difficult question. How do we actually recognize and respond effectively when behavior becomes that complex and disturbing, so outside the norm?
Yeah, that erosion of boundaries is terrifying because it happens step by step. Our next account. This one really drives home how hard it can be to identify a threat sometimes. They don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they're just there in the background of life until they're not. This story is from someone who was a sophomore in high school. It involves her neighbor, Jonathan, a man around 30 who lived with his grandmother.
Yeah.
She described him as sort of a nerdy guy, but she also sensed he had some kind of crush or romantic feeling towards her, which made her uncomfortable.
Okay, an age gap and that uncomfortable feeling.
Right. His behavior was subtly creepy. He'd constantly warn her about her boyfriends, hint that she should be with him instead, give her strange health advice, just generally inserting himself into her life. Then one day, he specifically asks about her school's outside science day, a field trip. He wanted to know what day she'd be going to the local park.
That's a red flag. Very specific questioning.
Huge red flag. And sure enough, on the day of the trip, while she's at the park with her best friend, Rebecca, Jonathan appears. Just walks up to them. He starts trying to convince them to leave the park and come back to his house. He even offered to take Rebecca too, which the narrator said felt even creepier.
Trying to isolate them.
Exactly. They refused, tried to walk away back towards the teachers and other students, and that's when it escalated instantly. She said, "Jonathan grabbed me by the ankle, and I fell to the ground. He started dragging me." They were a bit far from the teachers, partially hidden by a swing set.
Oh my God, a physical attack.
Yes, but her friend Rebecca reacted immediately. She started fighting him, punched him square in the nose, and screamed for the teachers. Jonathan let go instantly and ran off. The police were called, but the narrator, scared of getting into trouble or maybe just overwhelmed, didn't fully identify him. She vaguely described him as a stranger.
Understandable, given the shock and fear.
Yeah. And for years, that was it. Just a terrifying memory of a stranger. Until years later, she was talking to a different friend who happened to be Jonathan's nephew. The nephew casually mentioned his Uncle Jonathan was in jail. He'd been caught with illicit pictures of children on his computer.
Oh no, confirmation.
Complete confirmation. The narrator said, "The realization that someone who was a confirmed predator had touched me like that as a child makes me feel sick to my stomach." It's just that chilling proximity of danger disguised as normalcy.
It really underscores the insidious nature of predatory behavior, doesn't it? How it can hide behind a veneer of being nerdy or friendly or awkward. It's a powerful argument for trusting your gut instincts, even when someone's behavior is just creepy, rather than overtly threatening initially. And the lasting impact, even when the full truth comes out much later. It's profound.
Absolutely. Trusting that gut feeling. Okay, so for our final story. Sometimes the most vulnerable moments happen when we should feel safest. At home. Unexpectedly. This account is from a woman remembering an incident when she was 12 years old. She was home alone, middle of the night. Her dad worked the graveyard shift. She'd done the usual routine, locked the doors, went to sleep. But around 2 a.m., she woke up to the sound of knocking on her back door.
Middle of the night, home alone, immediate fear.
Right. Her first thought, maybe slightly illogical, was that it was her dad. Maybe he forgot something. Though she knew he had a key. Wishful thinking, perhaps. But the knocking didn't stop. It continued for a bit, then paused. Only to start again, but this time at a different spot. The kitchen window.
Moving around the house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then it stopped at the window and restarted to the front door, but at a harsher level, she said. More insistent, more aggressive. By this point, she's terrified, absolutely frozen in fear, couldn't scream, couldn't move, just pure panic. And then the knocking moved again, closer and closer to my bedroom window. And her curtains, she mentioned, were the see-through kind.
Oh no, she could be seen.
She forces herself to look, and she sees him, a tall man wearing a dark ski mask. She thought maybe it had a skeleton design on it, but it was dark. He was just peering in, tilting his head slowly as he looked at her.
That image, horrifying.
She shut her eyes tight, trying to make it unreal, repeating, "It's not real, it's not real." After a moment, she risked opening them again. He was gone from the window. A wave of relief, right?
Relief, maybe.
Very brief, because immediately after she heard a voice,
Yeah.
right outside the window, a loud whisper, and it said, "Tell me I'll cut you out."
Chilling. The threat became verbal.
Yes, that finally broke her paralysis. She could move, but she didn't sleep for the rest of the night, obviously. Her dad came home later, confirmed he hadn't come back early, hadn't knocked on any doors or windows, there was no physical evidence left behind. But she remains convinced, to this day, that it was absolutely real.
And that leaves you with that deep unease, doesn't it? Was it real? Was it a waking nightmare fueled by fear? The mind can play tricks in those states, but the experience for her was undeniably real. It raises that question about the veil between perceived safety and genuine threat, how thin it can become, and the psychological scar it leaves, regardless of objective proof. The sensory detail makes it incredibly powerful.
It really does. Well, that brings us to the end of our stories for today. We've heard a really diverse range, haven't we? From unsettling mysteries in cemeteries to the, frankly, terrifying actions of other people in everyday life. It's a stark reminder, I think, that fear can truly surface anywhere, anytime, challenging our basic sense of security.
Absolutely. And these personal accounts, they urge us to listen to our instincts, maybe be more aware of our surroundings than we sometimes are. Safety can be a fragile thing, and these stories show the profound complexity of fear, the hidden truth that sometimes emerge in the most disturbing ways. It makes you think about what they reveal, not just about the events, but about us, about the world.
We hope these accounts have given you something to think about, something that stays with you after listening. Thank you for joining us on this unsettling journey. Until next time, please stay safe. Goodbye for now.